It's simple.
It's simple.
Well, it's a fast food democracy right now based on the convenience. And then you know what happens when you eat a lot of fast food? You get sick, you die. Well, I think democracy is laying on its deathbed right now because we've been feeding it this fast food convenience democracy, and it's not working.
Yeah. Bev, let me ask you this, too. Two of the people that were in my world for the last 8 years who are really exposing electronic voting and even voting by mail with our troops and how that can be manipulated and stolen in an election were Greg Palast and Brad Friedman. Are both of them still attached to the issue, or is this a bygone issue now because, again, the Democrats are in office?
Brad Friedman is very much attached to the issue. He recently came out with an editorial promoting hand-counted paper ballots, public counts. Greg Palast is more pro-machine. He's very worried about the registration side of things, but he has never jumped on board much with the public counting side. And so I'd like to get him more on board with public counting, less worrying about, after-the-fact audits and do we have a paper trail. If it's not in public, it's not good enough.
Well, one thing that keeps bothering me, Bev, remember Ray Martinez, the former vice chair of the Election Assistance Commission? He's now a lobbyist here in Austin. He told in the interview that Vicki Carp and I had with him, I said, Mr. Martinez, secrecy is taking precedence over transparency. And he said, yes, you're right. In fact, I would prefer all paperless machines.
Yeah.
That's our problem. The people that are leading us don't want paper.
Well, certain people in power don't want it. I think those people have compromised human rights. And I think we do need to call it's not just voting rights, it's not just rights, it's human rights in that these go straight back to what liberty is in the first place. Again, if you don't have control of your own government, if there's no public control of government, we don't have liberty.
It's not self-government.
And if you don't have public control of elections, public ability to see what's going on in the crucial processes, you don't have public elections. So it's a relatively simple argument that I found people do understand. What we do need to do next is then they go, well, what's the solution? Well, the solution is to count votes in public. And then they go, well, so why don't we do it? Well, it's going to be a battle because it is at this point an industry that's worth billions of dollars a year to certain vendors who are well represented with the powers that be.
And the election officials are well in their pockets. Many of them are.
Which is, again, why we need critical mass here. And, again, why my idea of going to the nationalist, people like Glenn Beck, who uses fear to control his audience, you can use the fear of a foreign hacking into our election, among other things. And that could be a useful tool. We're almost out of time. I'm never out of questions, as you know, Bev. Let's go to the issue real quick here, since I've got you, both of you, to national ID cards, having these national ID cards at the polling place, or some of the complications involved in proving you are who you are, especially in light of all of this ACORN stuff and dead people voting. It almost seems like like a lot of issues, like immigration, you're getting, or even now healthcare, you're getting cornered into getting these kind of national biometric state-issued IDs in order to prove who you are so that you can vote and your vote will count. It's an aside issue, Bev, but at the same time, that also imposes upon our liberty. How do we get around that?
That is such a thorny question. Not asking for ID at the polls has certainly, made it easy for bogus voters. But the biggest threat, I think, is even bigger than ID at the polls is this massive vote by mail. With vote by mail, you don't have any idea who voted. You could have one person voting 50,000 people, who he has targeted as being non-frequent voters. But the ID, there's only a few forms of ID that we have that aren't completely bogus, our passport and our driver's license. And frankly, I know it interferes with liberty and it's a small cost to some people, but we have to be able to identify who is voting.
But as you just mentioned, you can replicate those, you can fake those. We look at even matriculate cards here coming from Mexico or something, and yet, we are all supposed to have identifications, which can be hacked, speaking of hacking, can be forged. There is never going to be a safe identification system. I would assume that if you pre-register to vote, and at that point your information can be corroborated through your use of utilities, these types of things, you can prove who you are before you even actually go to the polls.
Yeah, well, we don't have a good solution, and I've read the proposed solutions. Some of them are, again, worse than the cure is worse than the disease. They've got this voter registration modernization board that's just horrific. They want to get us buying a whole bunch of new technology that doesn't yet exist, steering it to the same old vendors that make our e-voting machines. And all of the perps, from the electronic voting industry seem to be on this committee. So I think we also need to get a little more conservative about just willy-nilly changing everything all the time. Every time you change things, you can get unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's right.
The most important thing is to have real people showing up at the polls.
Right.
That makes it at least harder. The minute you take away polling place voting and start going to, this vote by mail, internet voting, super center voting, where you want real bodies showing up at the polling place. That's probably the number one defense against that kind of vote fraud.
Well, keeping it simple, Bev, like voting at the polling place on election night kind of makes it where there's X amount of people, not a large amount of people, but they're people. I think that will help eliminate that problem to a large degree.
Right. It's going to be tough. The idea of non-citizens voting is tough, especially with the some of these things are just so thorny. I don't have the answer. I know that non-citizens, when they go in to register for their driver's license because of motor voter registration, often are just told, oh, would you like to register? They're never told they need to be a citizen. And then someone just signs them up. I know that because they've called me and said, well, they were concerned about this, that, and the other. And I said, well, are you a citizen? I'll say, well, no. And I'm like, well, you can't vote in a federal election if you're not a citizen. Well, they were told by the Department of Motor Vehicles that they could. There's a lot of issues that we're not going to solve here today on the air, but I think prioritizing, we want the essential components of the election to be in public.
Right.
If we can get that far, we'll be able to start controlling some of the rest.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are, as you mentioned, some things that technology is good for, such as cross-referencing if somebody's dead or if they voted 3 times. Or these are things that can actually be useful if they're in the right hands. Because we're almost out of time, I just wanted to make this point, and again, thank both you, Bev, and you, Kathleen Wynne, for coming here and having this discussion for the last 2 hours. Folks, get this interview out to everybody. And I want to make this point that sometimes it doesn't always seem that we accomplish very much, but think of what it would have been like if there were no Kathleen Wynnes or Bev Harrises out there or Vicky Karps or Brad Friedmans or even Greg Pallas out there. We have actually held them back from completely stealing this thing, lock, stock, and bagel. So I'm very proud of the work you've done, and I'm here anytime you need me. Bev, Kathleen, good to meet you. Thanks for coming to the studio. Bev, excellent work. Blackboxvoting.org, folks. Support them. Throw a couple of bucks into them. Let them do their work. You'll be very proud of that. And also handcounted.paperballots.org. They need your donations as well. I'll be back today at 3 o'clock Central Time with a whole new edition of Deadline Live. As always, we remind you, stay bold, America, and mighty forces will come to your aid. Thank you, ladies.